Everyone told him I was trouble. His board of directors, his family, even the media painted me as the chaos that would destroy his empire. But when the smoke cleared and the truth came out, this billionaire shocked them all with 4 words that changed everything. She is my peace. If you're ready for a story that will flip everything you think you know about love, power, and redemption, hit that like button right now and buckle up. This is going to be a ride you'll never forget. My name is Imani Washington, and 6 months ago, I was just another civil rights attorney from Detroit, trying to make a difference in this world. I never imagined that walking into that charity gala would turn my entire life upside down. But sometimes, fate has other plans, doesn't it? I remember the moment I saw Jonathan cross across that crowded ballroom. Tech billionaire, 34 years old, worth more money than some small countries. He was surrounded by people in expensive suits, all laughing at his jokes, but there was something in his eyes that looked lonely. Maybe it was the attorney in me, always looking for the truth beneath the surface, but I saw past all that wealth and power to the man underneath. When he walked over and introduced himself, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so unexpected. Here was this man who could buy anything, anyone, and he was nervous talking to me. We talked for hours that night about everything except money and business. He told me about his love for old movies. I told him about my passion for justice. We connected on a level that had nothing to do with our bank accounts. But that's when the warnings started. The very next day, his assistant called to cancel our lunch date. Then his best friend, David, pulled me aside at another event and said, "Imani, you seem like a nice girl, but Jonathan's world is complicated. Maybe you should think about whether you really want this." I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought it was about the money, the lifestyle differences. I had no idea what was really coming. His mother, Victoria Cross, made her feelings crystal clear during our first meeting. She invited me to lunch at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, and I thought she wanted to get to know me. Instead, she spent 2 hours explaining why I wasn't suitable for her son. "Imani," she said, cutting her salad with surgical precision, "Jonathan needs someone who understands his world. Someone who won't bring unnecessary attention or complications." The message was clear. I was the complication. But Jonathan stood by me, at least in the beginning. He told me his mother would come around, that his friends would see what he saw in me. He said he'd never felt this way about anyone before, and when he held my hand, I believed him. I believed in us. That's when the media circus began. The first article appeared in a gossip magazine. Billionaire's new love interest, gold digger or genuine. They had pictures of me leaving my modest apartment, walking into my small law office, comparing my background to his. The comments online were brutal. They called me every name you can imagine, questioned my motives, my character, my worth. Jonathan tried to shield me from it, but how do you hide from a hurricane? The attacks escalated quickly. Someone leaked my law school records, twisting my scholarship into evidence that I was desperate for money. They found old photos from college and spun stories about my past. Every case I'd ever worked on was scrutinized, every client questioned. My own colleagues started looking at me differently, wondering if I was using my relationship for personal gain. Then came the fabricated evidence. Harrison Wild, the chairman of Jonathan's board, requested a private meeting with me. He seemed concerned, almost fatherly. "Imani," he said, leaning forward across his mahogany desk, "I like you, I really do. But people are asking questions about your sudden interest in our company. These documents suggest you've been investigating us for months before you even met Jonathan." I stared at the papers he slid across the desk. Financial records, internal emails, meeting notes, all supposedly showing that I'd been building a case against Cross Technologies long before that charity gala. The dates were wrong. The signatures were forged, but they looked convincing enough to fool someone who wanted to believe them. "This is fabricated," I said, my voice steady despite the fear rising in my chest. "Someone is setting me up." Harrison shook his head sadly. "I want to believe you, Imani, but the evidence is concerning. Maybe it's best if you stepped back from Jonathan until this gets sorted out." But it wasn't just Harrison. The lies spread like wildfire through Jonathan's inner circle. His business partners whispered doubts. His friends started avoiding me. At social events, even the staff at his favorite restaurants began treating me with cold professionalism instead of the warmth they'd shown before. The breaking point came when someone leaked private text messages between Jonathan and me. Intimate conversations, vulnerable moments, Our fights about the pressure we were facing, all of it splashed across tabloid websites. I felt violated, exposed, like my soul had been stripped bare for the world to judge. Jonathan's doubt was the knife that cut deepest. I could see it in his eyes during our conversations. The way he'd pause before answering questions about my past. The way he'd study my face as if looking for cracks in my story. The man who once said he trusted me completely was now questioning everything. Maybe they're right, he said one evening as we sat in his penthouse, the city lights twinkling below us like fall stars. Maybe I don't really know who you are. Those words shattered something inside me. I'd faced down corrupt politicians, defended innocent people against impossible odds, but nothing had prepared me for the man I loved, doubting my very core. The final blow came from Victoria. She didn't make threats or ultimatums, she was smarter than that. Instead, she orchestrated a campaign of emotional warfare. She showed Jonathan evidence of my supposed investigation, questioned whether I was secretly recording our conversations, wondered aloud if I was working with his competitors. She planted seeds of doubt so carefully that Jonathan began to think they were his own thoughts. I need space, he told me on a rainy Tuesday evening. Just to figure things out, to separate what's real from what's complicated. Space, such a small word for such devastating rejection. I moved out of his penthouse that night, taking only what I'd brought with me months earlier. My small apartment felt like a prison cell after the freedom of his world. My law practice was suffering, clients were canceling, new cases weren't coming in, and my reputation was in ruins. I was losing everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, all because I'd fallen in love with the wrong man. The lawsuit came next. A frivolous claim from a former client, alleging malpractice and emotional distress. The timing was suspicious, the evidence thin, but it was designed to drain my resources and finish destroying my credibility. I couldn't afford the legal fees to fight it properly, and every day in court was another day the media had fresh ammunition against me. I remember sitting in my office late one night, surrounded by legal documents and unpaid bills, wondering how my life had unraveled so completely. 6 months earlier, I'd been a respected attorney with a growing practice and a bright future. Now I was unemployed, nearly broke, and facing professional ruin. All because I'd believed in love. But sometimes, when you're drowning, the universe throws you a lifeline from the most unexpected place. The envelope appeared under my office door on a Thursday morning with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a single note: the truth about Harrison Wild. Use it wisely. I almost threw it away, thinking it was another setup, another trap. But desperation makes you take risks you'd normally avoid. What I found on that drive changed everything. Bank records showing massive transfers from cross technologies to offshore accounts. Email chains between Harrison and competitors discussing insider information. Meeting notes outlining a plan to discredit me before I could uncover his embezzlement scheme. He'd been stealing from Jonathan's company for years. And when he learned I was a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one known for financial investigations, he panicked. The fabricated evidence against me, the media leaks, the lawsuit, it was all Harrison's orchestration. He'd convinced Jonathan's inner circle that I was the threat when he was the one bleeding the company dry. Even Victoria had been manipulated. Fed lies about my intentions until she genuinely believed I was dangerous to her son. But the most shocking discovery was hidden in the deepest files. Records showing that I'd actually been building a case against Harrison for months, not to hurt Jonathan, but to protect him. I'd noticed irregularities in public financial reports, suspicious transactions that didn't add up. I'd been quietly investigating, planning to present my findings to Jonathan as a gift, proof that someone who truly loved him would guard his interests even when he couldn't see the danger himself. The anonymous tipster turned out to be Harrison's own assistant, Sarah, who'd grown sick of watching him destroy innocent people to cover his crimes. She'd been gathering evidence for months, waiting for the right moment to act. My public destruction had been her final straw. I took the evidence to Jonathan immediately. Walking into his office felt like stepping into a battlefield where I'd already lost the war. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of doubting me had been crushing him too. "Jonathan," I said, setting the flash drive on his desk, "before you say anything, before you decide whether to trust me or not, you need to see this." I watched his face change as he reviewed the files. Confusion, then anger, then something that looked like grief. He realized that everyone he'd trusted had betrayed him, while the woman he'd abandoned had been trying to save him all along. "Imani," he whispered, and I heard his voice break. What have I done? The confrontation with Harrison was swift and brutal. Jonathan didn't waste time with accusations or negotiations. He simply presented the evidence and watched Harrison's carefully constructed world crumble. The man who'd painted me as a manipulative opportunist was revealed as exactly that, himself. Victoria's reaction surprised me most. When she learned the truth, she didn't make excuses or try to justify her treatment of me. She simply broke down and cried. "I was so afraid," she said through her tears. "Harrison convinced me you were going to destroy Jonathan, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing my son to someone who would hurt him. I never realized I was the one helping to destroy his happiness." The media reversal was almost as brutal as the original attacks. The same outlets that had painted me as a villain now couldn't get enough of the real story. Billionaire's love fights off corporate conspiracy. Read the headlines. Attorney's secret investigation saves fortune. It was vindicating, but also exhausting. I'd never wanted to be a story, I'd just wanted to be loved. But Jonathan's public response was what mattered most. Instead of hiding behind corporate PR or letting his lawyers handle the situation, he called a press conference. I watched from the audience as he stood at the podium, looking directly into the cameras. "For months, you've been told that Imani Washington was a threat to me, to my company, to my family," he said, his voice strong and clear. "You were told she was chaos, that she would destroy everything I'd built, but you were wrong. While everyone else was warning me against her, she was quietly protecting me from the real threat. While others were plotting against me, she was investigating on my behalf. While I was doubting her, she was proving her love through action, not words." He paused, and I saw him look directly at me across the room. "They said she would bring chaos into my life," he continued. "But the truth is, she is my peace. She is my peace in a world full of people who would lie to me for their own gain. She is my peace in a business where trust is a luxury I couldn't afford until I met her. She is my peace because she loved me enough to save me from myself." Those 4 words, "she is my peace," echoed through every news report, every social media post, every conversation about our story. They became our truth, our declaration, our victory over everyone who'd tried to tear us apart. The proposal came 2 weeks later. Not in some grand public gesture, but in my small apartment where I'd cried so many tears over losing him. He got down on one knee in my tiny living room and said, "Imani, I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are my peace?" I said yes, not because he was rich or powerful, but because sometimes love survives even when everything else falls apart. Harrison's story ended, as it should have, with justice. He was arrested, charged with embezzlement and fraud, and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His reputation was destroyed, his assets seized, his carefully constructed life reduced to nothing. The chaos he'd tried to pin on me became his own legacy. Victoria and I built a real relationship after that, based on honesty instead of fear. She admitted that she'd seen her own younger self in me, a woman who'd married for love, but was constantly questioned about her motives. Her overprotectiveness of Jonathan came from her own painful past, and she'd let that pain blind her to the truth about me. Jonathan and I married 6 months later in a ceremony that was the opposite of the media circus that had nearly destroyed us. Small, intimate, surrounded only by people who genuinely loved us. Victoria walked me down the aisle, tears streaming down her face, as she whispered, "Welcome to the family, daughter. Today, our foundation supports young attorneys from underrepresented communities, helping them build their careers without the barriers I faced. We've created scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities, and legal aid clinics. The money that once seemed like a source of division between us has become a tool for justice." People still ask me if I ever doubted our love during those dark months. The truth is, I doubted everything: Jonathan's feelings, my own judgment, whether real love could survive in a world built on appearances and assumptions. But I learned something important. Sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing each other despite everything trying to tear them apart. The warnings about me bringing chaos were wrong. I didn't bring chaos into Jonathan's life, I brought truth. I brought the kind of love that investigates threats instead of ignoring them, that fights for protection instead of comfort, that chooses loyalty even when it's not returned. I brought the chaos that comes with justice, with standing up to corruption, with refusing to be quiet when someone you love is in danger, and in return, Jonathan gave me something I'd never had before: peace. Not the peace of a quiet life, but the peace that comes from being truly known and loved anyway. The peace of having someone fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. The peace of building something real in a world full of pretense. They warned him I'd bring chaos. They were right, but sometimes chaos is exactly what a corrupt system needs. Sometimes you have to tear down the lies before you can build something true. Sometimes the woman they call your destruction is actually your salvation. But the real nightmare was just beginning. What I didn't know was that Harrison had been planning this destruction for months. Like a chess master moving pieces I couldn't even see. The anonymous letters started arriving at Jonathan's office first. Your girlfriend is investigating your company, they claimed. She's been building a case against you since before you met. The letters looked official, complete with fake law firm letterheads and fabricated witness statements. Harrison had hired people to create an entire false narrative about my motives. I sat in my empty office at dawn, surrounded by the evidence of my innocence, and realized that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free immediately. First, it has to destroy everything built on lies. The question was, would Jonathan believe me now, or had Harrison's poison run too deep? Walking into Jonathan's office with that flash drive felt like carrying my own heart in my hands. He looked up from his desk, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with before Harrison's poison had clouded his judgment. Jonathan, I said, my voice steady despite everything. Before you say anything, you need to see this. I watched his face transform as he absorbed the evidence. Confusion turned to horror, horror turned to rage, and finally, rage turned to something that broke my heart, grief. Not just for what Harrison had done, but for what we'd lost because of it. Imani, he whispered, and I heard 20 different emotions in that one word. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. The confrontation with Harrison was swift and brutal. Jonathan didn't waste time with explanations or second chances. Security escorted Harrison out in handcuffs while reporters gathered outside. The man, who'd orchestrated my destruction, was finally facing his own. But it was the press conference that changed everything. Jonathan stood before those cameras and spoke directly to the world. They said she would bring chaos into my life. But the truth is, she is my peace. She is my peace because she loved me enough to protect me when I couldn't see the danger. She is my peace because she fought for us even when I stopped fighting for her. Those 4 words, she is my peace, became our victory anthem. The media that had destroyed me now celebrated our love story. Victoria tearfully apologized, admitting she'd been manipulated by fear. My law practice was flooded with new clients who wanted the attorney brave enough to fight billionaire corruption. 6 months later, Jonathan proposed in my tiny apartment where I'd cried so many tears. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are my peace? He asked. I said yes, because some love stories are worth fighting for, even when the whole world tries to tear them apart. Sometimes the people trying to destroy you are really just clearing the path to your destiny. If this story moved you, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear that their storm is temporary, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. Remember, your peace might be hiding behind someone else's definition of chaos. Then came the photographs. Pictures of me entering buildings where Jonathan's competitors had offices, taken months before I'd even heard his name. But the timestamps were altered to make it look like I'd been meeting with his rivals after we started dating. The photos were innocent. I'd been there for completely unrelated legal consultations, but in Harrison's hands, they became evidence of corporate espionage. The cruelest twist was how Harrison used my own integrity against me. He knew I'd been quietly researching some irregularities in cross-technologies, public filings, not to harm Jonathan, but because I'd noticed red flags that worried me. I'd planned to present my findings as a gift, proof that I was protecting his interests. But Harrison spun my legitimate concerns into evidence that I was building a case against the company. Jonathan's friends started pulling him aside at every social event. She's asking too many questions about your business, they'd whisper. Why is she so interested in your financial records? They didn't know that I'd only asked because I'd spotted the very crimes Harrison was committing. The psychological warfare was masterful and brutal. Harrison turned my love into suspicion, my protection into betrayal, my care into manipulation. Every gesture of love became evidence of hidden motives. Even my legal expertise, the very thing that made me capable of protecting Jonathan, was twisted into proof that I was dangerous. By the time the mainstream media picked up the story, I wasn't just facing gossip anymore. I was facing a coordinated campaign designed to destroy everything I'd ever built, done in my situation. Let me know in the comments below. Remember, your peace might be hiding behind someone else's definition of chaos. The morning Jonathan asked me to move out, I knew I'd lost everything that mattered. He couldn't look me in the eye as he said it. I need time to think, he whispered, but we both knew what he really meant. The doubt had won. I packed my life into 3 suitcases and returned to my tiny apartment. The contrast was jarring from his penthouse overlooking the city to my 1-bedroom with a view of the parking lot. But it wasn't the luxury I missed. It was him. It was us. It was the future we'd planned that now lay in ruins. My law practice crumbled next. Clients canceled faster than I could process the paperwork. We don't want to be associated with this drama, they said. 20 years of building my reputation, gone in 20 days. My office felt like a tomb. Silent except for the sound of my own breathing and the occasional ring of reporters calling for statements I refused to give. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends stopped calling, afraid to be seen with me. My own family started asking if the accusations might be true. Honey, my mother said during one painful phone call, maybe you should just walk away from all this. Find someone, simpler. But the worst part was the silence from Jonathan. No calls, no texts, nothing. The man who used to share every thought with me had vanished completely. I'd lie awake at night wondering if he was relieved to be free of me, if he'd already started believing I was everything they said I was. The frivolous lawsuit came like a final nail in my coffin. A former client, clearly coached and paid, claimed I'd mishandled their case. The legal fees alone would bankrupt me. I realized then that Harrison wasn't just trying to separate me from Jonathan. He was systematically destroying my ability to ever threaten him again. This wasn't love or business anymore. This was war, and I was losing every battle. Then came the miracle I never saw coming. Sarah Chen, Harrison's assistant, slipped that envelope under my office door at 3 in the morning. She'd been watching him destroy me for months, and she couldn't stay silent anymore. The flash drive contained everything. Bank records showing Harrison had stolen over $40 million from Cross Technologies. Email chains where he discussed my problem with hired investigators. Meeting transcripts where he planned each phase of my destruction like a military operation. But the most shocking discovery was buried in the deepest files. I'd been right all along. Those financial irregularities I'd noticed. They were Harrison's crimes. The research I'd been doing wasn't to hurt Jonathan, it was to protect him. I'd been building a case against Harrison for months, planning to present it to Jonathan as proof that someone who truly loved him would guard his interests even in secret. Harrison had discovered my investigation through company surveillance, and panicked. Every lie he'd told, every piece of fabricated evidence, every manipulation, it was all to stop me from exposing him. He'd turned my love into a weapon against me, convinced Jonathan I was the threat when I was actually his salvation. My hands shook as I read the final document. A recorded phone call between Harrison and Victoria where he admitted the truth. She's not investigating to hurt Jonathan. She's investigating to save him. That's what makes her so dangerous to us. Victoria hadn't been protecting her son from me. She'd been protecting Harrison's secret, manipulated into believing his lies just like everyone else. Even she was a victim in his web of deception.